Thanks to you all so much. Thanks, Jeff. Excellent panel. So we're going to transition now. We're going to try and just plug in a few things as we go. So we are lucky to have Chair Mary Nichols, who's just walking in with us right now, who's going to be, we're going to have a dialogue with her and Cliff Rushtoffen, who is the lead for Governor Brown on energy issues. So we are blessed and honored that they're both slowly making their way up, Mary and Cliff, as Cliff is distracted. That's right, exactly, the slow walk. So, Chair Nichols, so Cliff, we're going to have you guys sit right up front. Yeah.
Mike.
All right. So again, we're very honored to have both Cliff and Mary here. So I'm going to hand off to Cliff. Cliff, take it away.
Thanks very much, Tony. We're going to have a little dialogue here and then open it up for some questions. Of course, Mary's been chair of the Air Resources Board in her latest incarnation since 2007, and was chair under Governor Brown 1 in the 1970s and 1980s. And a central challenge for Mary in this term has been dealing with climate change and implementing AB 32. We've heard earlier today a lot about distributed generation technologies, disruptive technologies for the grid. Mary, could you comment on how these efforts relate to our ongoing campaign to deal with climate change and implement AB 32?
Well, we've divided up the world into sectors in our plans for achieving our ambitious climate goals. And we're already looking ahead to beyond 2020 because it turned out that 33% RPS was really not all that difficult, and utilities are going to get there earlier than was originally thought. And now, instead of talking about how do we get enough renewables into the grid, we're talking about what do we do about the fact that there's too much. And so that's an example, I think, of how it pays to keep your eye on what your actual goal is, which I think we all agree is to put a marker down and to actually achieve very substantial decarbonization of our entire economy. That's what it's going to take to get to the levels of reductions in greenhouse gases that science tells us are necessary. If we're going to avoid the worst effects of global warming, we're not going to avoid all the effects of global warming, and we have to adapt to what the reality is, which is, we just had the hottest summer on record. Disruptive technologies that are usable to reduce the need for combustion of fuels, whether it's in the delivery of power for manufacturing or in cooling our homes and running our appliances, or in moving us around, both ourselves and our stuff, are going to be essential to meet those very ambitious goals. We at ARB don't know what the right recipe is or who are going to be the winners and losers in terms of all of these technologies. We try to make assessments as best we can, but mostly what we try to do is to keep focused on the goal, because as a regulatory agency, our job is to set standards and adopt rules that can be used to then allow for the private sector to go out and do what it does best, which is innovate and develop new products.
Well, the focus here has, of course, been electricity. You have a lot of experience in the transportation sector. CARB regulates emissions from the transportation sector, and you've spent lots of years working on programs to bring cleaner cars to the state, promote alternative fuels, reduce emissions from the tailpipe. And as we kind of chart the course for a decentralized electricity system and a new electricity system, I'm wondering if you have thoughts about what the appropriate mix of incentives, regulation, other tools might be, and how your experience in the transportation sector might translate into this area.
Sure. Well, let me back up just a second and say that a couple of years ago, ARB did some analysis for our own planning purposes in terms of what the transportation system would need to look like if we were going to achieve both our climate goals and meet the federal air quality standards for ozone and fine particles. And the conclusion that we came to was that by about 2030, every single car that was sold in California, every new car, would have to be either a battery electric, a hydrogen fuel cell vehicle, or an advanced hybrid with the liquid fuel being a renewable fuel. So that gives you a picture of where we're headed, what we think we need. We're not trying to choose how much of each of those models we would have. We don't know for sure, but we think each of them has a distinct set of advantages and disadvantages, and that we're going to need all of these technologies, at least for the foreseeable future. Our approach with the transportation sector has been to look at the vehicle first, and what its emissions profile and what we needed in terms of consumer choice and filling a demand for new vehicles, and then to believe that the fuel follows the vehicle. So the emissions, as I'm trying to think of a good analogy, and I'm not coming up with one at the moment, but the idea is that if you look at the vehicle and how it's used, then you work back from that to the fuel that goes into the vehicle, because that's a more logical way to approach the problem. So I think we feel the same way about the electricity sector, that we're looking at the services that electricity provides and how we can utilize it as widely as possible and as cleanly as possible. And again, we're less focused on, for example, renewables per se than we are on getting whatever mix of renewables is going to take to give us a diverse and efficient and reliable network out there. So from an overarching policy perspective, we see electricity as an extremely valuable fuel, and the providers of electricity as being in the fuels business, as the fuels of today, and even more so in the future.
Well, if I could just follow up on that, you talked about the 2030 goals and how electricity is providing fuel already, and we should boast that California now has over 100,000 pure battery electric or plug-in hybrid vehicles, 40% of the national market. So the efforts that CARB and others are leading are really bearing fruit. How do we integrate these sectors, though, that have traditionally been different, the electricity sector and the transportation sector, as we move more toward electrification of the transportation system?
Well, if I were czar, which unfortunately
Yeah,
I'm not, sorry, not quite. What I would be trying to do, and I think what we are trying to do as an administration, all of the energy agencies that I work with, the PUC, the Energy Commission, the California Independent System Operator, are trying collectively to think about how we best use our legislative authorities and our unique mandates to work together to try to integrate these systems in a way that accomplishes the overall goal. Again, using climate as our measuring stick of what we need to get to, but obviously not being willing to sacrifice affordability, reliability, other goals that we have for the system. How do we make this all work together? I think it starts with understanding that whoever it is that is providing us with our electricity is also going to be and should be looked at as somebody that could be providing us with other services as well. I mean, we already know that electric utilities are running, for example, efficiency programs, which in many states is regarded as complete heresy. Why would somebody who wants to sell you electricity want to be getting you to use less of their product? We broke that particular mold years ago, but we know we have more more room to work with. We know we need to do more to deliver efficiency, demand response. These are tools, and we have to be creative about how those are going to get out there into the marketplace. We live in a world where there's all kinds of new cool hardware. There's also all kinds of cool new software that people are inventing at a rate faster than I can keep up with. But every time I go out to a conference or a meeting, I get business cards from people or see displays and hear about things that I think, wow, this is just amazing. Now, how do we get that actually to be used? So that would be our concern is how do we get these technologies into the marketplace and help them be successful? From the perspective of a regulator, we try to understand what's possible, know what our goals are, and then figure out how to use the right mix of regulatory demand and market competition to get to that particular end result, knowing that things are changing and that we're going to have to adapt, but that without government setting firm goals and showing a willingness to be consistent, that we can't realize what is needed in terms of investment and opportunity for the market.
I think we have time for a couple of questions. Tony, is that for
Yes,
Mary?
we've got time for about 2 questions. So if anybody has any question for Mary? Dave over here. Sorry, we're going to wait for the.
You calling people, Tony?
Oh, if that works.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. You can, actually, Mary is in charge, so if Mary says questions, she will be.
She is
first,
a czar.
Okay, you're the first. Anyway.
Microphone's coming, just around, John. Thanks. And if you could announce yourself, it'd be great.
Thank you for. Curious how you see natural gas being phased out as a pipeline.
We haven't, set any deadlines for eliminating natural gas, and natural gas as a resource. I think, I don't know quite how to say this properly. We understand that emissions from burning of any fossil fuel, including natural gas, are going to be rationed to the point of being very, very limited in the future, and that we need to think about how to use this fuel wisely as part of the transition. From our perspective, the availability of more natural gas as a result of all of the development that's gone on in the last few years is a net plus for climate change. It has helped phase out coal or prevent the ability to build new coal plants. It's caused a real disruption in terms of electricity generation in other places, and it should continue to do that because it's a superior fuel in that regard. Renewable natural gas, which is also not only a possibility but a reality. There's a lot of methane out there in the world that's going into the atmosphere, can be used to substitute for the natural gas that we're using today. So I don't think we're at a point where we're saying no more gas could ever be used for heat. It depends on what the source of the natural gas is, how much it's leaking as it gets moved from where it's produced to where it's used, and how efficiently it can be used. We have to sort of look at a life cycle approach to any particular fuel, and that would include natural gas. It's still going to mean a major effort to reduce emissions on that front. But whether the natural gas that we have is going to be deployed in heating hot water versus vehicles versus other chemical uses, I don't think we know the answer to that question right now, and we're not really trying to be the ones to direct it. I think what we are trying to do, though, is to avoid making costly mistakes. I think we should really be thinking about whether, for example, we should be using very limited public dollars to subsidize replacing, for example, other fuels with natural gas. So that's where we tend to be focused.
Probably have time for one more brief question, if anyone has it. Otherwise, I might ask with prerogative here a quick question. One of the things we're going to end with, Mary, today is talking about really where are we headed post-2020. And this is going to be a hot topic through this year and looking at legislation or other issues. So if you had a crystal ball and were to look at September or October of next year, where would we be of looking at post AB 32? What can we look ahead?
We're clearly going to be working on a midterm goal for greenhouse gas emissions. In that time frame, we're already taking a look at what's feasible and what's necessary based on the science. I'm hoping that the legislature, by this time next year, will have passed a legislation dealing with this issue. It may be that they'll be directing the administration to set the target, or it may be that they will actually, by that time, be working with us on what the target is. I can't tell you how fast that's going to go, but I think we know that there are certain programs that we're already working on that people need to see are going to move out past 2020. Cap and trade is, for example, one of those. We're going to be working on an update to the scoping plan based on studies that are now underway on energy policies that are needed beyond 2020. So there will be probably a new scoping plan out there in the community, and lots of other proceedings going on, but hopefully coming together around the idea of setting a target that's between 2020 and the 80% reduction that we need by 2050. And I think the other thing that we're going to be seeing, and I just want to draw people's attention to this, because I think we often do think, since we are such a big economy ourselves, that we can do everything within the boundaries of California, that we have a lot of interesting partnerships that are really just in the process of developing with other states and with other countries that are going to be expanding the market for California's ideas and California's programs. I'm thinking about work that's going on with Washington and Oregon, as well as British Columbia through the Pacific Coast Collaborative, and things that we're working on together relating to low carbon fuels, incentives for electric vehicles, ways of advancing our common agendas around energy efficiency and clean technologies. Also, looking somewhat further afield, although not much, with Mexico and with China and other countries that are in Europe, for example, that want to partner with us. I think it was just yesterday that the governor signed, or there was a rollout of a further development of an MOU that the governor signed last year with Japan, where there's going to be a demonstration project working around electric vehicle charging stations, a new
They're going to
demonstration.
invent their research and development arm of the Japanese government's going to do a pilot investing in 50 fast charging stations in California.
And they want to come here.
And they want to
it.
do a similar one on storage.
And we're going to be doing probably similar things in other places as well, Mexico being a place I know that we're looking at doing some joint development of technology and electricity projects with. So just a lot going on. Thank you.
Well, thanks to both of you. If we could have a round of applause for these guys. Very much appreciate Mary's time.